What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses sits down for what she thinks will be a friendly chat about her latest film, only to find herself facing a host who seems determined to turn the interview into his personal attack platform? It only took 37 seconds of explosive confrontation for Greg Gutfeld to show his true colors and send Meryl Streep walking off his show in disgust, leaving viewers stunned and his reputation in shambles. The Fox News studio buzzed with its usual energy that Tuesday evening. Meryl Streep had agreed to appear on the Greg Gutfeld show to promote her new drama about climate change activists. She sat poised in the guest chair, wearing a simple navy blazer, her silver hair perfectly styled. The legendary actress had done thousands of interviews over her decades-long career, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. "Welcome back to the show," Gutfeld announced to the cameras, his trademark smirk already playing at the corners of his mouth. "Tonight we have the queen of liberal Hollywood herself, Meryl Streep, here to tell us all about her latest Save the World movie." Meryl's smile faltered slightly at the introduction. The condescending tone was unmistakable, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for having me, Greg. I'm excited to talk about the film." "Oh, I bet you are," Gutfeld replied, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Another movie about how terrible America is, right? How we're destroying the planet and only Hollywood elites like you know how to fix it?" The actress straightened in her chair, clearly taken aback by the immediate hostility. "Actually, the film is about ordinary people who care about their communities and want to protect the environment for their children. It's really quite hopeful." "Hopeful?" Gutfeld let out a harsh laugh. "Come on, Meryl. We both know this is just another excuse for you to lecture regular Americans about how they should live their lives. You know, the same Americans who actually work for a living instead of playing dress-up for millions of dollars." Meryl's eyes widened. She had expected some pushback, perhaps some challenging questions about the film's themes, but this felt like a personal attack from the very first moment. "Greg, I think there might be a misunderstanding here. The movie actually celebrates working people who are trying to make a difference in their communities." "Working people?" Gutfeld scoffed. "When's the last time you pumped your own gas, Meryl? When's the last time you had to choose between paying for groceries or filling up your tank? You live in a bubble, completely disconnected from reality. And then you have the nerve to make movies telling the rest of us how to live." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the usual back and forth of a talk show interview. This felt mean-spirited and personal. Meryl took a deep breath, trying to maintain her professionalism. "I understand that my life is very different from most people's," she said carefully. "But that doesn't mean I can't care about issues that affect everyone. Climate change impacts working families more than anyone else. They're the ones who suffer when there are floods and droughts and extreme weather." Gutfeld rolled his eyes dramatically. "There we go. Climate change. The boogeyman that Hollywood loves to wave around to scare people into voting for Democrats. Tell me, Meryl, how many private jets did you take this year? How many massive mansions do you own? Your carbon footprint is probably bigger than entire towns, but you want to lecture truck drivers about their emissions?" "That's not what this is about," Meryl replied, her voice remaining steady despite the obvious frustration building inside her. "The film isn't about lecturing anyone. It's about showing how communities can come together to solve problems." "Communities coming together," Gutfeld repeated mockingly. "Is that what you call it when Hollywood millionaires get together at their fancy fundraisers to decide what's best for the little people? You know what I call it? I call it elitist nonsense from people who have no idea what real Americans deal with every day." The host was clearly enjoying himself now, feeding off the discomfort in the room. His voice grew louder and more aggressive with each comment. Meryl glanced toward the show's producers off camera, looking for some sign that someone might step in to redirect the conversation, but they seemed frozen in place. "Greg," she said, trying one more time to salvage the interview, "I came here tonight to talk about a film that I'm proud of, a story about hope and community action. If you'd like to have a real conversation about the themes in the movie, I'm happy to do that. But if you just want to attack me personally, then I think we should end this now." Gutfeld leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with what looked like malicious delight. "Oh, so now you want to run away when someone asks you tough questions? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You Hollywood types can dish it out, but you can't take it. You make movies attacking conservative values, attacking traditional families, attacking everything that makes America great. But the second someone pushes back, you want to play victim." "I have never attacked traditional families," Meryl said firmly, her patience finally beginning to crack. "My films celebrate love, compassion, and human dignity. If you see that as an attack on your values, then maybe you should examine what your values really are." The host's face darkened at the suggestion that his values might be questionable. "Don't you dare turn this around on me, lady. I'm not the one who spent decades making movies that tear down everything decent people believe in. I'm not the one who uses award shows to bash half the country. I'm not the one who thinks I'm so much smarter than everyone else that I can tell them how to vote, what to think, and how to live. I have never told anyone how to vote," Meryl shot back, her composure finally slipping. "I have expressed my opinions as a citizen, which is my right in this country. The same right you exercise every single night on this show." "My opinions?" Gutfeld stood up from his desk, towering over his seated guest. "My opinions are based on common sense and love of country. Your opinions are based on hatred of America and contempt for the people who make this country work. You hate cops, you hate the military, you hate anyone who doesn't bow down to your woke agenda." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Meryl stared at him in complete disbelief. "I do not hate America. I do not hate police officers or military personnel. How dare you say such things about me? You don't know anything about my beliefs or my heart." But Gutfeld was just getting started. He had clearly decided that destroying his guest was more important than conducting a professional interview. "I know exactly what you believe, Meryl. I know because you've been telling us for years through your movies and your speeches. You believe America is evil. You believe our traditions are backwards. You believe anyone who disagrees with you is stupid or bigoted." "That is completely false," Meryl said, rising from her chair to meet his aggressive posture. "You're putting words in my mouth that I have never said. You're attributing beliefs to me that I don't hold. This is not journalism, Greg. This is character assassination." The studio had gone completely silent, except for the sound of cameras rolling. Even the crew seemed stunned by the vicious turn the interview had taken. What had started as a simple promotional appearance had devolved into something ugly and personal. Gutfeld seemed to realize he had the upper hand and pressed his advantage. "Character assassination? You mean like what you and your Hollywood friends do to conservatives every single day? You make movies where conservatives are always the villains, always the racists, always the bad guys. You turn award shows into political rallies against half the country. And now you want to cry about character assassination? My films tell human stories," Meryl said, her voice shaking with anger now. "If you see villains in stories about compassion and understanding, that says more about you than it does about me. And I have never used an award show to attack anyone. I've used those platforms to speak up for people who don't have a voice." "People who don't have a voice?" Gutfeld laughed bitterly. "You mean illegal immigrants? You mean criminals? You mean everyone except the hardworking Americans who pay your salary by buying movie tickets? Those people don't have a voice in your world, do they, Meryl?" The attack on immigrants was the last straw. Meryl had maintained her composure through personal insults and professional attacks, but she would not sit quietly while Gutfeld dehumanized vulnerable people. "Stop. Just stop right there. I will not allow you to use this platform to spread hatred toward immigrants or anyone else. These are human beings you're talking about, people with families and dreams and hopes for a better life." "Oh, here we go," Gutfeld said, throwing his hands up in mock exasperation. "The bleeding heart liberal routine. Tell me, Meryl, how many illegal immigrants are you housing in your Malibu mansion? How many are sleeping in your guest rooms tonight? Or do you just like to virtue signal about helping them while making sure they stay far away from your gated community?" The hypocrisy accusation cut deep, but Meryl refused to take the bait. "My personal living situation is not relevant to treating people with basic human dignity. What you're doing right now is cruel and wrong, and I won't be part of it." Gutfeld sensed his guest was close to breaking and decided to go for the kill. "Cruel and wrong? You know what's cruel and wrong, Meryl? Millionaire movie stars lecturing working families about morality while living lives of incredible privilege and excess. You know what's cruel and wrong? Making movies that paint America as evil while taking advantage of every benefit this country offers. You know what's cruel and wrong? Pretending to care about regular people while having nothing but contempt for their values and beliefs." Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Meryl stood there, realizing that nothing she said would matter to this man. He had decided to use her appearance as an opportunity to score political points and boost his ratings, regardless of how much damage he did to her reputation or dignity in the process. The realization was both infuriating and heartbreaking. "You don't know me," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know my heart, my beliefs, or my intentions. You've created this caricature in your mind, and you're determined to attack it no matter what I say. This isn't an interview, Greg. This is a public execution, and I won't participate in it anymore." But Gutfeld wasn't finished. As Meryl reached for her purse and prepared to leave, he delivered what he clearly intended as the final blow. "That's right. Run away, Meryl. Run back to your mansion and your private jets and your Hollywood friends who will tell you how brave and wonderful you are. Leave the real work of making America great to the people who actually love this country." The words echoed through the studio as Meryl Streep, one of the most accomplished actresses of her generation, gathered her dignity and prepared to walk away from the most hostile interview of her entire career. Meryl stood frozen for a moment, her hand gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The studio lights felt harsh and unforgiving as she processed what had just happened. In all her years in the entertainment industry, through countless interviews and public appearances, she had never encountered such deliberate cruelty disguised as journalism. "You know what, Greg?" she said, turning back to face him one final time. "I came here tonight as your guest. I came here with respect for you and your audience, ready to have a real conversation about art and storytelling and the issues that matter to people. But you had a different plan, didn't you? You decided before I even sat down that you were going to try to humiliate me for your own entertainment." Gutfeld crossed his arms, still wearing that smug expression that had become his trademark. "I decided to ask you real questions instead of the softball nonsense you get everywhere else. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Real questions?" Meryl's voice rose slightly, the emotion she had been holding back finally breaking through. "Calling me a hypocrite isn't a question, Greg. Accusing me of hating America isn't a question. Making up positions I've never taken and then attacking me for them isn't journalism. It's bullying, plain and simple." The audience remained silent, caught between loyalty to their host and obvious sympathy for the actress who was clearly being mistreated. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others watched with the morbid fascination that comes from witnessing a public meltdown. "Bullying?" Gutfeld laughed, but there was something forced about it now. "Lady, you've been bullying conservatives for decades with your movies and your speeches. You've used every platform you've ever had to attack people like me and my audience. Don't talk to me about bullying when you've made a career out of it." "I have never attacked you personally," Meryl replied firmly. "I have never called you names or questioned your love of country or made assumptions about your character based on your political beliefs. I have never tried to humiliate you on national television for my own amusement. But that's exactly what you're doing to me right now." The host seemed to realize that his guest was not going to break down or storm off in tears, as he had apparently hoped. Instead, she was standing her ground and calling out his behavior directly, which was clearly not part of his plan. He needed to regain control of the situation. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "You Hollywood types are all the same. You can dish it out, but you can't take it. You make movies attacking everything we believe in. You give speeches telling us we're all idiots. But the moment someone fights back, you start crying about being victimized." "When have I ever called anyone an idiot?" Meryl demanded. "When have I ever attacked your beliefs?" "I'm genuinely asking, Greg, because you keep making these accusations, but you never provide any examples. You just keep repeating the same talking points without any evidence to back them up." Gutfeld shifted uncomfortably. He was used to guests who would either fight back with equally personal attacks or crumble under pressure. Meryl's calm, reasoned response was throwing off his usual rhythm. "Your whole career is an example. Every bleeding heart liberal movie you've made, every award show speech where you bash traditional values." "Which movies?" Meryl pressed. "Which speeches? If my entire career is an attack on traditional values, surely you can name specific examples. What exactly did I say that was so offensive to you?" The host waved his hand dismissively, clearly frustrated that she wasn't letting him get away with vague accusations. "I'm not going to sit here and list every single time you've insulted half the country. Everyone knows what you stand for." "No, Greg, everyone knows what you've told them I stand for. But you've never actually listened to what I've said or bothered to understand the stories I've tried to tell. You've created this fictional version of me in your mind, and now you're attacking that instead of the real person sitting in front of you." The cameras kept rolling as the confrontation reached a new level of intensity. What had started as a typical Gutfeld ambush interview was turning into something neither the host nor his producers had anticipated. Instead of backing down or losing her temper, Meryl was methodically dismantling his attacks and exposing the hollow nature of his arguments. "Listen, lady," Gutfeld said, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. "I don't need to create anything. Your record speaks for itself. You hate traditional families. You hate law enforcement. You hate the military. You hate anyone who doesn't agree with your radical agenda." "There you go again," Meryl said, shaking her head in frustration. "More accusations without evidence. I have never expressed hatred for traditional families. My own family means everything to me. I have never expressed hatred for law enforcement or military personnel. These are just lies you're telling about me, and frankly, I'm tired of it." "Lies?" Gutfeld's face flushed red. "Are you calling me a liar on my own show?" "I'm calling your statements about me false, because that's exactly what they are. You're attributing beliefs and positions to me that I don't hold and never have held. If that's not lying, what would you call it?" The host looked around the studio, seeming to realize for the first time that this interview was not going the way he had planned. His usual tactics of overwhelming guests with personal attacks and rapid-fire accusations were failing against someone who refused to be intimidated. "You know what I call it?" he said, his voice rising. "I call it holding you accountable for your own words and actions, something nobody in your precious Hollywood bubble has ever done." "Then hold me accountable for my actual words and actions," Meryl challenged. "Quote, something I've actually said. Reference something I've actually done. Stop making things up and then attacking me for positions I've never taken." Gutfeld turned to his audience, looking for support. "Can you believe this? She comes on my show, spends years attacking everything we believe in, and then acts like she's the victim when someone finally calls her out." But the audience response was muted. The usual cheers and applause that greeted Gutfeld's attacks on liberal guests were notably absent. Even his most loyal viewers seemed uncomfortable with the one-sided nature of this particular confrontation. Meryl noticed the lukewarm response too, and it seemed to give her strength. "Your audience isn't cheering, Greg. Do you know why? Because they can see what you're doing here. They can see that you're not actually debating ideas or challenging positions. You're just trying to hurt someone for entertainment value. My audience knows the truth about people like you." Gutfeld shot back, but his confidence was clearly shaken. "They know what Hollywood really thinks about them. People like me," Meryl repeated. "There's that phrase again. You don't see me as an individual human being with my own thoughts and beliefs. You see me as a symbol of everything you dislike, and you're determined to tear that symbol down regardless of whether it has anything to do with who I actually am." The host tried to regain his footing with another personal attack. "I see you exactly for what you are. A privileged millionaire who looks down on regular Americans while pretending to care about social justice. A hypocrite who lives in luxury while lecturing working families about sacrifice." "You don't know how I live my life," Meryl responded quietly. "You don't know what causes I support privately or how I try to make a difference in the world. You've never asked me about any of that because you're not interested in the truth. You're only interested in confirming your preconceived notions." Gutfeld realized he was losing control of the interview completely. His guest was supposed to either fight back with equal nastiness or break down under pressure. Instead, she was calmly and systematically exposing the shallow, mean-spirited nature of his approach. He needed to do something dramatic to shift the momentum back in his favor. "You want to talk about truth?" he said, standing up again and pointing at her accusingly. "Here's the truth. You and your Hollywood friends despise ordinary Americans. You think we're stupid. You think we're backwards. You think we're beneath you. And now that someone has the guts to say it to your face, you want to play innocent." "I don't think any of those things," Meryl said sadly. "And the fact that you believe I do says more about the kind of media you consume than it does about me. Someone has filled your head with hatred and resentment, and now you're using this platform to spread that poison to others." "Hatred and resentment?" Gutfeld's voice cracked slightly. "I'm defending the values that made this country great against people who want to tear it down. If that's hatred to you, then so be it. Defending values by attacking people personally, by making up lies about their beliefs, by trying to humiliate guests on your show? Those aren't the values that made America great, Greg. Those are the values that tear communities apart." The studio had grown so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras and lighting equipment. Even the production crew seemed transfixed by the confrontation unfolding in front of them. This was no longer just a hostile interview. It had become a clash between two completely different visions of how public discourse should work. Gutfeld made one final desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. "You know what tears communities apart, Meryl? Movies like the garbage you're here to promote. Stories that teach people to hate their neighbors, to distrust their government, to tear down everything previous generations built." "Have you even seen the film?" Meryl asked pointedly. "Because it sounds like you're criticizing something you know nothing about. The movie is about people working together to solve problems. It's about hope and community action. If you find that threatening, maybe you should ask yourself why." The host had no answer. He hadn't seen the film, hadn't researched its themes, hadn't bothered to prepare any substantive questions about the work his guest was there to discuss. His entire approach had been based on generic talking points and personal attacks, rather than any real engagement with her art or ideas. Realizing that he had been completely outmaneuvered, Gutfeld decided to end the interview on his terms before it could get any worse for him. "You know what, Meryl? I think we've heard enough. Thanks for coming on the show and showing everyone exactly who you really are." But Meryl wasn't quite finished. She had endured 20 minutes of personal attacks and false accusations, and she was going to have the last word. "You're absolutely right, Greg. I think your audience has seen exactly who we both really are tonight, and I suspect they're smart enough to draw their own conclusions about what they've witnessed." With that, she picked up her purse, nodded politely to the stunned audience, and walked toward the studio exit with her head held high. The heavy studio door closed behind Meryl with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent space. For a moment, nobody moved. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Gutfeld standing alone at his desk, his face a mixture of defiance and dawning realization that something had gone terribly wrong. The host looked out at his audience, expecting the usual supportive applause that followed his takedowns of liberal guests. Instead, he was met with uncomfortable silence and questioning stares. A few people clapped hesitantly, but the enthusiasm that typically greeted his confrontational style was completely absent. "Well, folks," he said, trying to inject his usual swagger back into his voice, "I guess we just saw the real Meryl Streep. Can't handle a few tough questions without running away like a spoiled child." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. Everyone in that studio had witnessed the same 25 minutes of television, and it was clear that Meryl had not run away from tough questions. She had systematically dismantled every accusation he had thrown at her, challenged him to provide evidence for his claims, and maintained her dignity throughout his increasingly desperate attack. One of the producers off camera was frantically gesturing for Gutfeld to wrap up the segment and go to commercial. The show was supposed to continue for another 15 minutes, but with the guests gone and the mood in the studio completely soured, there was no way to salvage the remaining time. "You know what?" Gutfeld continued, seemingly unaware of how badly he was coming across. "This is exactly what I expected from Hollywood royalty. They can dish it out in their movies and their speeches, but they can't take it when someone fights back. They want to lecture us about tolerance and understanding. But the moment you challenge their beliefs, they storm out like teenagers having a tantrum." A woman in the front row of the audience raised her hand tentatively. This was highly unusual during a taping, but the whole evening had already gone completely off script. "Excuse me," she said when Gutfeld reluctantly acknowledged her, "but it seemed to me like she answered all your questions. She didn't storm out until you started calling her names and making accusations you couldn't back up." Gutfeld's face flushed again. Being challenged by his own audience was not something he was prepared for. "Ma'am, with all due respect, maybe you weren't paying attention to what just happened here. That woman has spent decades attacking conservative values and traditional families through her work. But when you asked her for specific examples, she asked you to name them and you couldn't," another audience member chimed in. "You kept making claims about what she believes, but you never actually quoted anything she said." The host looked around desperately for support, but more hands were going up throughout the studio. His own audience was turning against him, and the cameras were capturing every uncomfortable moment. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a defensive tone that was completely different from his usual confident delivery. "I don't need to quote every single liberal talking point she's ever spouted. Her record speaks for itself." "What record, though?" asked a man in the back row. "She asked you the same question, and you never answered it. You just kept repeating the same accusations over and over." Gutfeld could feel the situation spiraling completely out of control. This was supposed to be his show, his audience, his territory. But somehow, Meryl Streep had managed to win them over even after leaving the building. Her calm, reasoned responses had made him look like a bully, and now his own supporters were questioning his tactics. "You know what, folks," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded strained and artificial, "I think some of you might be suffering from a little Stockholm syndrome here. That's what happens when Hollywood celebrities use their charm and manipulation tactics. They make you forget that they hate everything you stand for." But the audience wasn't buying it. The spell that Gutfeld usually cast over his viewers had been broken by witnessing his cruel treatment of a guest who had done nothing to deserve such hostility. They had watched him make accusation after accusation without providing a shred of evidence, and they had seen how gracefully she had handled his attack. "She didn't seem hateful to me," said a young woman near the middle of the audience. "She seemed like she genuinely wanted to have a conversation about her movie, but you wouldn't let her. Every time she tried to explain her actual positions, you talked over her or changed the subject to attack her personally." The host's trademark smirk had completely disappeared now. He was facing the worst nightmare of any television personality, losing his own audience in real time on camera. All the confidence and swagger that had made him a star were evaporating as people began to see through his act. "I was holding her accountable," he insisted weakly. "I was asking the tough questions that nobody else has the courage to ask." "Those weren't questions, though," said an older gentleman in the front row. "Questions have question marks at the end. You were just making statements about what you think she believes and then getting angry when she disagreed with your characterization of her." Gutfeld looked toward his producers again, silently pleading for them to cut to commercial and end this disaster. But they seemed frozen, unsure whether stopping the cameras would make things better or worse. This was live television gold, even if it was destroying their host's credibility in the process. "Listen, everyone," Gutfeld said, his voice now taking on an almost pleading quality. "I know some of you might feel sorry for her because she seemed upset, but that's exactly how these Hollywood types operate. They play the victim card whenever someone challenges their radical agenda." "What radical agenda?" asked yet another audience member. "She talked about making a movie about people who care about the environment and want to help their communities. How is that radical?" The host had no answer. He had never bothered to learn anything about the film Meryl was supposed to promote, had never researched her actual political positions, had never prepared any substantive questions about her work or beliefs. His entire approach had been based on generic talking points and personal attacks that he assumed would play well with his base. "You know what?" said the woman who had first spoken up. "I came here tonight thinking I was going to see an interview. Instead, I watched you try to humiliate a guest for 20 minutes straight. She was polite, she was patient, she answered your questions honestly, and you just kept attacking her personally. That's not journalism, that's bullying." The word hung in the air like an indictment. Bullying. That's exactly what everyone in the studio had witnessed, and now they were saying it out loud. Gutfeld tried one more time to regain control of the narrative. "Bullying?" he said, but his voice cracked slightly on the word. "I'm not the bully here. I'm the one standing up for regular Americans against Hollywood elites who look down on us." "She never looked down on anyone," said the man in the back row. "You were the one being condescending. You called her lady like it was an insult. You made fun of her beliefs. You interrupted her constantly, and you accused her of things she never said or did. If anyone was being elitist tonight, it was you." The observation hit Gutfeld like a physical blow. He had always positioned himself as the voice of the common man, the guy who spoke truth to liberal power. But tonight, he had come across as exactly what he claimed to oppose: arrogant, dismissive, and cruel to someone who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. "I think we should go to commercial," he said quietly, all the fight gone out of his voice. But his audience wasn't finished with him yet. "Before you do," said another voice, "I just want to say that I'm embarrassed to have been part of this tonight. I thought I was going to see a real conversation between people with different viewpoints. Instead, I watched you try to destroy someone's reputation for entertainment. That's not what I signed up for." Several other audience members nodded in agreement. Some were already gathering their things and heading for the exits, unwilling to participate any further in what they now recognized as a cruel spectacle rather than legitimate television programming. Gutfeld stood there watching his audience abandon him, both literally and figuratively. The people he had counted on to cheer his attacks on liberal guests were instead walking out in disgust at his behavior. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. "You know what, folks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now, "maybe we should call it a night." The remaining audience members sat in stunned silence as the reality of what they had witnessed began to sink in. They had watched a beloved actress conduct herself with grace and dignity under the most hostile circumstances imaginable, while their host had revealed himself to be petty, cruel, and dishonest. As the studio lights dimmed and the cameras finally stopped rolling, Gutfeld slumped in his chair behind the desk. The swagger was gone. The smirk had vanished. And the confident persona that had made him a television star lay in ruins around him. He had entered the evening expecting to score an easy victory against a Hollywood liberal, but instead had destroyed his own credibility in front of the very audience he depended on for support. In the hallway outside the studio, Meryl Streep walked toward the exit with her head held high, knowing that she had handled an impossible situation with the dignity and grace that had defined her entire career. She had faced down a bully on national television and emerged victorious, not through cruelty or personal attacks, but simply by refusing to sink to his level and insisting on basic human decency. The confrontation was over, but the damage to Gutfeld's reputation was just beginning. In 37 seconds of explosive television, he had revealed his true character to the world, and there would be no going back.